Hey guys, this is Comic Uno, and today I'm doing Comic Uno's Best Comics of the Week, and this is a show where we review all the comics I've read this week in one show. We go least favorite to best pick of the week and everything in between. But before I get started, I did have 12 books this week, pretty normal size haul, but I also have another book I wanted to review, and that is Stargazer. This is an advanced review. It's from Mad Cave Studios. I actually just did an interview with the editor-in-chief of that company, so if you want to go check that out, that's already been posted, and they gave me the opportunity to read Stargazers, which is definitely a book I was looking forward to even before the interview, so I was like, I really want to check that out. So luckily I got an advanced copy of it, and what is this book about? It's about a group of young kids who have a bit of a traumatic event happen to them, something that they can't explain, and our main character's brother is really affected by it. He's physically hurt, he's mentally hurt, and then we get to see in the present of them being older how that trauma has affected them. And I do hope that in the future we get to learn a little bit more about these characters. I really feel like we've only scratched the surface, but it introduced us into an interesting, I think, psychological story, and that's going to be cool to see. Also, the artwork's really good. This is the cover, and this is pretty much the interior look as well, and I always like this style of, like, dark, but still very bright coloring here, so definitely enjoyed the artwork, and definitely want to give that next issue a try, see where these characters go. There's little tidbits that we get to see that, like, our main character is married, and obviously we don't see her wife anywhere around, so what happened there? So there's definitely some hidden stories. I'm excited to see how these characters will grow with the little tidbits that we got. So Stargazer issue 1, that's my advanced review for it. Go check it out when it's out. I believe it comes out in the next couple of weeks or so. Moving on to our books that came out this week. So, number 12 for me is Young Justice issue 14. So, Young Justice, I love these characters, which is why I'm picking it up. I love this team, but the writing is kind of all over the place for me, and there's just so many characters. So this issue, we have all of the Wonder Comics characters. So you have Dial H, we have Naomi, we have the Wonder Twins here, and then they're like, no, that's not enough. Let's introduce even more characters. We have Aqualad from the Young Justice television show. We have Spoiler, which I love my girl Steph, but there's no room for any of these characters. We have Arrowette, who I also love that character. I love Sissy. And yeah, it's too much going on, and there's all like little potentials here. Like I enjoyed Steph and Tim's dynamic. It's one panel where Stephanie's like, hey, I hate your costume, so I love that moment. I love that Brian Michael Bendis keeps the, again, in character of Sissy. One thing I love about her character is that she retired and she never was a superhero again. She's like, yeah, you know, this is not really my thing, and I like that that's referenced, even though she's a superhero again here. But I like that part of her narrative. So, and also Sideways is here. I like that character. But they have no room to do anything. It's just so cluttered. It's like, okay, what's going on with Superboy now? And then there's two different artists, and it's just a lot. It's a lot going on, but also nothing really going on. Plot-wise, nothing really happens in this book. It's just because there's so much trying to be stuck onto the page that you're just left wanting it to be spread out a bit more, I would say. I just wish it was structured differently than just throwing everything at us. So Young Justice issue 14 gets 2 stars, and that is number 12. Moving on to number 11, which is Decorum issue 1, which I actually did an in-depth review for on Comic Frontline, if you want to go check that out, with Chris Dark Avenger C86, and if you want to go check out his comic reviews, definitely do so. And yeah, I talked a bit about the book, and I'll say I'm not usually a huge Hickman fan. I've been loving his X-Men, and that's definitely been different for me. I'm not a big fan of his wide world type of storytelling and his many maps, but I love X-Men, and I think something I've learned about Hickman is that you gotta give him a couple issues to tell his story. He likes starting from the middle of a story, he likes explaining the world, and then getting into the characters. So that's kind of what happens in this issue. You're just thrown into the mix of this assassin world. You get introduced to a couple of characters. They're pretty surface level, though. There's not a lot of room for character building, but you know the world because there is 20 maps to tell you about the world. This is, I believe, it's a $5 book, but there's just a lot of white pages. There's just a lot of, here's Here's Earth. Here's a credit page that literally just says maps. It's a lot of white pages and diagrams and little explanations of these worlds. And yeah, I didn't really love how this book was broken up, but it gave me, I guess, enough for another issue. And honestly, less because of the story and more for the artwork. I love how negative space was used. I actually do like a lot of the white that was here, and then the small blotches of color. I really enjoyed that aspect. So it's a very different looking book, which is very cool. So I'm going to give this definitely one more issue to see where this goes. I probably want to give this 3 issues because, again, it's Hickman. It takes a little while to get to the meat of the story. But I don't know if there was any attachment to the characters or this world for me. It just really was the look that I enjoyed about this book. So I'm going to give that 2.5 stars. I'm a little torn on it. We'll see where next issue takes us. But moving on to number 10. And number 10 for me, I'm upset that this is so low because I really liked the last arc and obviously love this character. But that is the Amazing Spider-Man issue 41. I was actually looking forward to this because I wanted to know what was up with Boomerang. But this issue is Exposition City. It's just all about explaining of okay, how did we become team members in a way? And you get the explanation of how Boomerang teamed up with Kingpin. He got into this artifact thing that gives him visions of some sort. And that's how they started teaming up. And now they're going up against Vermin. And it's a lot for this one issue. But again, it's just all explained to you. There's not a lot of good character beats for me in this issue. I like that Otley's back on artwork. I thought that was great, and I love his visuals, and it's pretty clean for a busy issue like this. But yeah, I just wish the information was kind of directed to us a little differently. I did find myself to be a little bored with this issue. So the Amazing Spider-Man issue 41 gets 2.5 stars, and that is number 10, I believe. Moving on to number 9, which is probably one of the bigger books that came out this week, and that is Cable issue 1. And I am a Cable fan. I like his character a lot. I tend to get his ongoing series. I enjoy surprisingly enough, the time travel aspect, even though I'm not a huge time travel fan. But I like him. I like his brooding. And this is very different. This is not your average Cable story. It kind of proves the point that it's like, all right, this is not the guy with the big guns. This is the guy with the big sword. So I enjoyed the little play on what we're used to with Cable. But it's very much this kind of like off-hours Krakoa stories. Like, what are the mutants doing when they're not part of the X-Men and they're just hanging out on Krakoa, which made this issue a bit slower for me. It's, Cable having a save with armor and helping these little mutant kids, and the ending was interesting, though. I like the end where we get to see other Cable is around somewhere, and we don't really know what that's about, but that was a cool ending. I enjoyed that. And that gives me just enough to pick up the next issue. But with so many X-Men titles, this didn't quite stand out. And that was my biggest issue, is that there's a lot of X-Men titles out there. And what did this issue do to say, hey, I need to pick up Cable every week? And it didn't have much for me in that regard. Even though I liked the opener, I liked Cable fighting Wolverine, I liked the little diagram of everyone who won. Dazzler beating Jubilee was a great little tidbit there. But other than that, I don't really know what this series is going to be every issue. But I'm going to give the next issue a try, see where it goes. And overall, I'm going to give that 2.5 stars. Artwork-wise, I love the pencils. I'm a big Phil Noto fan, but the coloring actually was really bright. I was surprised how bright it was, and that distracted me a little bit. So I don't know about the color palette, but I did like the pencils overall. So again, giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 9. Moving on to number 8, I believe this is a little higher than issue 1, and that is Gwen Stacy issue 2. And I like the old school feeling of this book. I'm a huge Spider-Man fan, as I've mentioned, and I'm sure you guys know if you watch this show. And I'm also a big Spider-Girl fan. She's my favorite character of all time. And one of the things I love about Spider-Girl is the modern twist to very classic stories and the classic feel to that book. And honestly, Gwen Stacy kind of has that tone as well, even from the artwork. It has kind of a Ron Friends feel to it. So I do like the art. I do like the feel of it. I I don't know if I quite like this version of Gwen Stacy, especially if you just compare it to the badass that Ghost Spider / Spider-Gwen is, but I like the Nancy Drew aspect. I like her spunk against Green Goblin. I thought that was cool, and she's getting herself into some trouble. But honestly, the moment that really shined for me was between Harry and Gwen and understanding why they were friends and how they connected with each other when everyone's kind of celebrating Mother's Day and they both understand that they both lost their mothers and they're like, hey, let's watch a horror movie on Mother's Day. I really like that scene a lot. So overall, it was a middle ground book for me, but I thought this was a better issue than issue 1 and definitely gave me enough to read more. So Gwen Stacy issue 2 gets 3 stars, and that is number 8. Moving on to number 7, a little lower than usual. I was talking about Hickman already, and that is X-Men issue 8. This usually does hit my top 5, but I am not a cosmic fan. Especially Marvel cosmic fan. I've always tried, just never could get into these characters. And this is a bit of a mix of mutants and space. And it does dive into some of the other titles that I dropped. So New Mutants they have their team here. I believe they were dealing with the space stuff in that book as well. I dropped it pretty early on. So it's very much more of a crossover to New Mutants, and I think people that have been enjoying that series is going to like this issue a lot more. But as just an X-Men fan, I liked more of like, okay, what's going on with this mutant religion? What's going on with that crazy room situation with the Summer families? So those are stuff I enjoyed a bit more with the X-Men. And I mean, one of the things I like about this book and one of the downsides is it's very Silver Age in the way that every issue feels like its own thing. It's not really playing a serialized story. It's just like, this is one adventure, and I'm sure it'll connect later on of the bigger picture. But felt very Silver Age in that regard, and that's the thing I like about it, but dislike, because you're like, okay, where is this story going? What is the overall arc besides here's the Broods, here's Nightcrawlers? So I'm sure it's all going to connect in the end, but I'm not really seeing the connection as of right now. But point being, if you like the Broods, you get some interesting story here. I like the fight between Magic and the Broods, and this whole commander captain thing was cool. Even though it kind of got old like the 4th time they said it, but I'm like, oh, it's kind of cool, this kind of warlike feeling that they have here, and like military type feeling. Artwork's really good. Love the coloring here, even though I think it is a different artist. Yeah, Asrar is doing the art, but the coloring really grounds it and makes it feel like used pencils, so I thought that was pretty cool. And yeah, overall I'm going to give that 3.5 stars, I believe. Still a good, I think, 3 stars or 3.5? Yeah, 3.5. I still think it was a good issue, a lot of good action, still some good character moments, but just not my favorite section of the X-Men. So I'm going to give that 3.5 stars, and that is number 8, I believe. That was number 7. Moving on to number 6, which is Go-Go Power Rangers issue 30. Almost made my top 5. This issue, well, Go-Go in general, it's starting to get to the end because we're meeting up to the point of Mighty Morphin. And currently I've been enjoying Mighty Morphin a little bit more because it's the new information. And this is just, how did we get there? And there's definitely a lot of interesting stuff, especially Kaya, learning more about her character as now the villain of the story. And what I liked is the small character moment of Kimberly realizing, oh, we're growing apart. What does that mean? So I like that. There are the smaller moments of the issue. I do think it's a little crowded, this book, with all the different plot lines that are going on. But there is an interesting cliffhanger with Finster and friends, the villain's henchmen finding the green dagger. So that's going to be cool. Is that going to tie into Shattered Grid at all? Is it going to tie into Lord Draken? So I'm interested to see where that's going to go. And obviously just where the characters are going to go now that the Omega Rangers are fully forming, and what Kaya's powers are all about, because she does seem stronger and more connected to the Morphin Grid, and how that's going to affect the full story. Also, it's nice to see Grace. It's always cool to see her in a large mecha fight, and in making a mecha fight actually part of the story was cool. So artwork is always pretty solid. I like the cartoony nature of it, but it still does fit the original artist, Dan Mora, who did this book. So I think there's some good facial expressions. So overall, I'm going to give that 3.5 stars, and that is number 6. Moving on to number 5, which is Incredibles 2 Slow Burn issue 2. I've been really enjoying this book. I like what Dark Horse has been doing with, I also had to make sure it was Dark Horse, what they've been doing with the Disney franchises, especially Incredibles. You know, now that Incredibles 2 is out, they don't have to really hide any storylines, and it's dealing with the ramifications of that movie, and it's a fun story, and especially in a superhero narrative and having comics, where Dash loses his powers and realizes what it means to go slow and not have super speed, which I think is pretty cool, and they deal with it well, and how the other characters are able to deal with that and learn from that as well. And I like that the villain makes them think on their toes. It's less about the action, more about how do we become better superheroes. So I like this issue. I think it's a fun arc, and if you like Incredibles, they've been telling some really good stories. So I think Christos Gage does this as well. So who's writing Gwen Stacy, yeah, and does a lot of SpiderMan stuff. So definitely grounds itself in the superhero genre and what makes that fun. So I'm going to give that 3.5 stars, and that is number 5. I'm going to take a sip of water. As you saw, I was opening my water bottle, and then we'll move on to number 4. All right, number 4 from me. Surprisingly enough, I don't think this has made my top 5, and that is Ant-Man issue 3. I still have my reservations about this book, where I still feel like Cassie is out of character, but what I liked about this issue is I feel like we're getting to a point where it felt like their old relationship. So with this issue, we get to see Cassie tells Scott, hey, I want to move to Los Angeles. And Scott's like, no. And he's trying to prove, like, I'm good enough. You don't need Kate. I could be a good enough partner. And he tries to, and it really fails. The Avengers don't respect him. No one respects him. But then he teams up with Spider-Man and Black Cat. And Cassie is able to see, like, oh, okay, my dad actually is cool. Spider-Man's jealous of him because Black Cat enjoyed Scott's jokes. So I like that. I like the ending of where Cassie led to, and I enjoyed the drama in that sense, that she wants to grow up and, you know, leave the nest even though she's like 16. So I'm interested to see where that goes. I don't love all the reactions, but I thought the end result was really good, and I hope we stay in this place, and the humor is really good for this book. Don't really love the main plot with all these bugs and stuff, but I like when it's centered on the characters and you have fun moments like the Avengers eating dinner and staring at Scott. So also, like, Scott being rude to Iron Man was kind of crazy. So there's some really interesting character moments. So Ant-Man issue 3 gets 3.5 stars. Artwork is pretty solid for this book overall. I do think it's stronger with the character moments than this blotchy ant creatures or bug creatures. But I think it works for the more comedic side of this book, even though the coloring is kind of dark for a comedy book. Moving on to number 3 is The Immortal Hulk, issue 32. This was a really interesting issue where we get to see, I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name. It starts with an X. He's the monster. It's like Zavu or something. Let me see. Zemnu, I think. So he's the creature that they've been fighting for a couple issues, and we realize that he's been morphing people's memories, and that includes Bruce and his own identity issues. So I really like that, and kind of the take of how we soak in media and how we soak in news. I think it was a really interesting commentary. And then we get to see two characters we haven't really seen much of, that doctor and how she compares that to being transgender. I thought was really interesting. I didn't honestly catch that she was transgender until this issue. So I really enjoyed that, and obviously seeing that representation, and her talk with Samson. I never get his name right. I think it's Samson. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting, and that's when the issue really picked up for me, was that moment where I'm like, oh, this, like, I understood the theme of the issue, and I'm probably a little bit before that, once we got the TV of that robot creature. He's a robot too, which is kind of interesting play on monsters in general. So overall, I thought it was a good issue. It's a little slower because it's not really a Bruce-centric issue, and again, it's kind of exploring a bigger theme of this world, and I guess a social commentary on, again, how we soak in media. And also the artwork, man, is so good for this book. I always love how haunting the book is. Really good character beats, and especially as we delve into the different identities of Bruce. So Immortal Hulk issue 32 gets 3.5 stars, and that is number 3? Yeah, number 3. Moving on to number 2, which is Hawkeye Freefall issue 4. I've been really enjoying this book. I like the comedy of this book, where we get to see Hawkeye being Ronin, but also not being Ronin and trying to trick all his friends. So I always thought that was really interesting, even though I'm like kind of losing track of why he's Ronin at this point. But he hires a Skrull. He has his robot friend, and I liked him interacting with some old characters that we know, like Mockingbird, and everyone kind of seeing that Clint is not Clint when he called her Mockingbird, so that should be an interesting ending. But I like the interaction between him and Daredevil was cool, and that Daredevil didn't know that he was Ronin, so I enjoyed that aspect. I don't know if I love the Hood, but I did like the moment where the Hood's like, you're my nemesis. And usually it's the opposite, where it's like the hero's trying to find their villain nemesis. So it's kind of cool to see it from the opposite side. So it's an interesting take on Hawkeye. And there's some good jokes with the superhero genre as a whole. Artwork's really solid, and interested to see where this one goes. I'm trying to remember what the cliffhanger of the issue was. Oh, he gets in the crosshairs of Bullseye, so we'll see how that goes. But solid issue. I've been enjoying this one. I like that it's a miniseries too, because it's a bit more contained. So I'm going to give Hawkeye Freefall issue 4 stars, and that is number 2. Moving on to number 1, and that is Snotgirl issue 15. I love the back of this issue because it literally says, thank you for reading Snotgirl. We literally put out one issue a year, pretty much. And we're going to take another hiatus. Bye. That is the downside of Snotgirls, that this book does not come out often. But when it does, man, it knocks it out of the park. And this issue, it knocks it out of the park. And we get to see Snotty Lottie, and Caroline at Meg's wedding, Norm Girl's wedding. And anytime there's a party, something bad happens. So just know that. And we get to see Lottie wanting to talk to Caroline, saying, okay, what are we? Are we girlfriends? Like, do you like me? Did you hook up with my friend that's not my friend? So she wants answers. And this is all going on when the wedding is a disaster, pretty much. And they eat bad berries and everyone's shitting their pants. So Caroline and Lottie, they go off to the side because Lottie's like, hey, I want to know what's up between us. And then Caroline just falls off a cliff and she's bleeding, just like dead. Lottie she has a allergy attack, so nothing is going well for them. And then, Lottie's got it ready that I'm going to die here. I don't want to, because this is Meg's wedding. I don't want to die in a forest. And there's a forest fire right next to them. There's so much going on. But in the end, we get to see a little bit more of the overall mystery unravel, where Caroline is alive, and Lottie's like, I've seen this before. Why are you alive? What's going on? And Caroline's like, I don't really know. I don't ask questions, but you want to be my girlfriend? And then Lottie's totally sucked in. She's like, yeah, you're perfect. I love you, blah, 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 blah. And she's just kind of hypnotized by Caroline. And it's such an interesting story. I love these characters. I love how raw these characters are and the mistakes they kind of make along the way. And very interested to see where this goes, because that's also the question I kind of love about Snotgirls. You don't even know really what the story is, besides obviously a commentary on social media and our presence on social media, how that unravels our own self-identity. But the overall story of like, okay, her brother, not brother, is like in a Secret Service outfit, military thing. So like, what is this overall story? And why is Caroline still alive? But Lottie's just stuck in the middle, and she's not the best narrator in the way that she's as confused as us, and that's what makes this story so interesting. So I really like it, and I do hope in the end that Lottie learns who to trust, I guess, because she, one thing I also like about this book is she surrounds herself with people that are just horrible, and if she had one good friend, maybe things would be okay. Maybe if she had an actual good girlfriend or a significant other, she'd be okay. And one glimpse I saw in this issue was Esther, or I think her name was Esther, and that's her, like, assistant character. And she's the only person that cares. She's giving truly good advice about Caroline, saying, hey, maybe you should talk to her, actually caring about her, saying, hey, I have your EpiPen just in case you get sick. So this is the one person that cares about her. And I'm like, in the back of my head, I'm like, I hope they're endgame. That would be kind of interesting. I don't know if Esther deserves Lottie, but I think if Lottie did have a good person in her life, she'd be okay. Because I don't think she's a bad soul by any means. She's just surrounded by toxic people. So, really interesting stuff. I love this book. I hope we don't have to wait another year for the next issue, especially if they're on hiatus. But, damn, it's just so good. I could gush about this book all day. And this issue was wild. It just had everything in it. And that includes the mystery, the character building, the relationships. The artwork is so freaking good for this book, too. And, shows the cuteness factor a little bit more. Like, there's this little dog that one of the characters is pretty much making money off of and utilizing for her social media. So artwork's really good. And then even the emotions between Lottie and Caroline, I thought the artwork was splendid there as well. So really good stuff. I'm giving that 4.5 stars. That is my pick of the week. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know in the comments below what were your pick of the weeks. What was your least favorite? What was your thoughts on all the books in between? So hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know in the comments below. And check out my Twitter and Facebook. Go check out my comics like Father Like Daughter and They Call Her Dancer. I have my Etsy store in the description. Also, issue 5 is officially out for Like Father Like Daughter, and same thing for issue 2 of The Dancer if you want to check those out. And every Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time is our comic book podcast over on Comic Frontline, where we discuss all things comics. So be sure to check that out as well. Thanks, guys. Bye.